Hello and welcome to the Extraordinary Marriage. I have a very special guest today. I have Trudy Cathy White. And if you don't recognize that name, she is the daughter of Truett Cathy from Chick-fil-A. And so I'm so excited to have her today because Chick-fil-A, that business represents so many values and standards. It represents me and my husband and many of my friends. And welcome today, Trudy.
Thank you so much. What a joy to be with you, and glad to hear you're a raving fan of Chick-fil-A.
Absolutely. We love Chick-fil-A. And like we were saying a minute ago, my husband calls it the holy food. And then you said, hey, you can't get it on Sundays, but you can't. But we love that Chick-fil-A has stays closed and holds those standards that we all value so very, very much. So today, Trudy, what we're going to do is I'm going to ask you a few questions about marriage and family and
Okay.
also your family life whenever you were growing up as a kid. And so let's just start with that. So tell me, how many years you've been married and how many kids you have.
Yeah. Well, John and I have been married for 46 years. We've raised four children, two boys and two girls. They're grown and married, and we have 17 grandchildren. So we have quite a tribe. Our oldest granddaughter is 19. Our youngest is a grandson who is one. So we have a lot of children in that that age range.
Hey, we were just having a get together at my house and with all the grandkids, we have 14 and we just found out
Oh,
there is one more on the way. Just when you think that it's all done, there's
right.
one more on the way. And so, wow, it's pretty crazy with big families when you all get together.
It is, but it's a lot of fun. We've just come out of Easter season, and we had a chance to be with my daughter and just a few of the grandchildren. But when we're all together, it can be a little wild and crazy for sure.
Well, let's start out today with a little bit about when you were growing up as a kid, because I think that it has to be kind of special whenever you're a part of a family that is building a business. And, whenever it starts out, you don't know how successful it's going to be, do you?
Right, for sure,
So,
for
what are
sure.
some things that you remember about your parents as you were growing up?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would say I always felt like I grew up in a normal family, like anybody else. It just happened to be my dad, was in the restaurant business. If you don't know much about my dad's backstory, he opened his very first restaurant when he was single at the age of 25 years old. So he opened it up in partnership with one of his two brothers and opened that restaurant. So for 18 years, he ran the restaurant before Chick-fil-A ever came on the scene. So people tend to forget that Chick-fil-A he didn't invent Chick-fil-A until he was in his 40s. And
Hmm.
of course, I was older and remember all of that coming about. But when I was growing up, we used to say that our second home was the kitchen of my dad's restaurant because I felt like that was a place where I grew up as much as I did in our home. We grew up south of Atlanta, and we would take trips back and forth to where my dad's restaurant was. My mom would put us in the car and we would go. And so I'm the only girl in the family, grew up with two brothers, and my mother would take us to my dad's restaurant to sing to the customers. That's my earliest memory of being a part of a family business, so to speak. But growing up, we did the normal things that children do. We grew up in the country, so we rode little short Shetland ponies. We would climb pine trees, throw pine cones at each other, and um, we had homework to do like everybody else with the schoolwork. But then when my dad invented Chick-fil-A, it was kind of a special day. I remember it quite well. Um, how this story came about was my dad had been in the restaurant business for so long. He opened a second restaurant and it actually burnt to the ground. So it put him back
Hmm.
in his first restaurant. And out of that season came the idea for him to debone the breast of chicken, that he would put special seasoning on it. He would pressure cook it because he always saw his mom pressure cooking chicken when she was cooking in his home. And then we would cook it in peanut oil, which gives it a kind of a unique flavor. And then my dad would serve that chicken on a toasted buttered bun with kosher dill pickles because he always put pickles on his hamburgers. And so my dad says it was a simple thing because he was a simple man. And he actually just used what he had right there in the restaurant. And for the first time in 1964, people began to eat chicken as a sandwich. And so we didn't think it was that big of a deal. But 3 years later, my dad went to the mall developers at Greenbrier Mall here in Atlanta, Georgia,
Mm-hmm.
and asked if he could lease a small piece of property there in the mall to be able to sell his sandwich. And the mall developers looked at him and they said, Mr. Cathy, there is no way we're going to serve food in a mall. And my dad was quite discouraged to hear that. And he would come home and talk to us as a family about it. This was a normal practice that my parents had when they encountered difficulties or disappointments or discouragement. Um, Oftentimes, we would sit down as a family right after dinner. I remember we would sit in our family room, and my dad or my mom, they would just share life with us. So they were really good about not protecting us from a lot of the heartaches that they were going through. But anyway, my dad said, I think I'm going to go back and talk to them again. And so my dad was very consistent and talking to the persistent and talking to the mall developers. And we were able to open the very first restaurant, food service restaurant in a mall ever. So I remember that day well because I was 9 years old and I didn't have to go to school that day. I think that's why I remember it because I got to skip school and be at the restaurant when it opened, and I handed out balloons to the customers. So that's kind of how life was for us in those on those early years when we were just getting started.
Well, I hear two things from that. Number one, I hear that your family sat down and talked and communicated and shared the ups and downs of life. And
Yes.
I mean, and here you are remembering that today. And the second thing I hear right there is that your dad started mall restaurants. That's kind of what it sounds like. He had that
Well,
idea,
that's exactly right. Uh,
every successful thing comes from an idea and somebody taking action on it. And then also the fact was that it didn't work the first time, but he thought it was such a good idea that he went and checked on it again. And
yeah.
we really do. We have to stay on things when we think they're important.
Well, a lot of great lessons to learn from that. One is the fact that my dad's second restaurant burnt to the ground. That was devastating for him.
Hmm.
A young married man with very small children, and just to understand, what will he do next? And I like to remind people that out of our difficulties, that God,
Hmm.
the Bible says that He will use everything for our good and for His glory. And my dad, many years later, reflecting back on that season, he said, had it not been for that fire in that second restaurant, he would likely have never invented Chick-fil-A. And so you see how God can take a very discouraging or even crisis in our lives and a disappointing season in our life and flip it and use it for something good. So I've seen that happen over and over again. And our family sitting down to eat dinner, yes, I mean, my mom, well, maybe back in those days it wasn't quite as popular to go through drive-throughs, but my mother was adamant about fixing a meal and having her family sit down together and eat. Now, I will say my dad worked really long hours, so there were some times that we would eat without dad, and he would come home, fix his plate, and put it in the microwave. But we had dinner time and we had family time together, and I do still to this day remember that.
And that's something that I try to tell people is really, really important to stop and take time with your family, whether they're small or whether it's a big family. It's so important for everybody to have a word. I know sometimes people sit quietly at dinner and like, okay, we're at dinner, don't anyone talk. And my goodness, sometimes that's the only time you get together. You know,
Well, that's true. And in the world we're in today, Connie, I mean, let's be honest, there's just so many distractions, and the phone is probably the number one thing that pulls people away from each other, even though we think we're in contact with each other. But it's hard to sit at the table and not check your phone. But to be able to put those things aside, my parents didn't have those, but they had other types of distractions, and you just have to be, I feel like, a little bit more intentional about how
mhm.
you live your life. To be to even take advantages if your family doesn't sit down for dinner, maybe you're in the car and maybe you can put away the cell phones, or turn off whatever you're listening to and have some intentional conversation even in the car between parents or between children. So we have to pick those moments when we can be a little more intentional how we're living our life.
Well, I know I love to listen to podcasts in the car
Mhm.
because I like to be doing something all the time. But I pick
Yeah.
up one of my grandkids once a week. And so as soon as he gets in the car, I turn that off. But the first
Uh-huh.
question he asks me when he gets in the car is, "Hey, Nana, can I borrow your phone?" Because he wants to
Um,
go do something on the phone. I'm like, "Nope, I just turned off. I was using my phone, but I just turned it off because I want to talk to you." And so we have a conversation on the way home
um,
instead. And he's gotten used to that. But at first, he just wanted to look at the phone.
I,
Communication
I
is,
think we all get that for sure. I actually have conversation cards in my car. So when the kids jump in, we pull that. It's kind of a game that you can play, and they ask me questions, and I ask them questions. And I have lots of books in my car, so if they want to read to me, they can read a story to me. So I do take advantage of that time to be very engaging with them. I mean, they can't go anywhere, right? They're in the car and the doors
right.
are closed. And so you got a captive audience there to be able to maximize that time. But I think that's great that you take the time to turn off what is attracting to you and refocus, shift your focus on those that are around you.
Conversation cards. I like that. I had not heard that or thought of it before. So, all right. So, I want to ask you one more thing on your parents, and then I want to move on to you and your marriage and your life with your kids. And that is, I teach a lot on communication styles and how we're all different. And so, describe your dad's personality style. Was he very assertive? Was he a person who was, he took a lot of time thinking about something or he made quick decisions? How would you describe your dad?
My dad was he had a warm personality. So if you're around him, you would know that he's going to give you all the attention that he has. He was wonderful at that. He was a terrific encourager. He loved to encourage other people. In fact, he is known for the statement that, for the question that he would ask audience often, he would say, "Do you know how to tell if somebody needs encouragement?" And everybody's kind of
Hmm,
thinking, not sure. And then he says, "If they're breathing." So if anybody's alive,
I
they
like
probably
that.
need a little encouragement. And my dad, he was an encourager. My dad also had the type of personality that he recognized potential in other people around them, and then he would always push them in that direction. He believed in people oftentimes before they even believed in themselves. He had a lady that cooked pies for him in his restaurant for over 40 years. And when you hear Miss Zelma's story, Miss Zelma starts out that she says, "I wasn't a pie maker." And Mr. Cathy said he thought I could be a really good pie maker. And she said, "I would try to make a pie and then I would just cry because it wouldn't be any good." And Mr. Cathy would say, "Let's try it again. I think you can do this." And of course, then she ended up working for so many years for my dad and retired after all those years. But it's just amazing how he was able to do that. But I think the most important thing that I will always recall about my dad was he was very consistent in how he lived his life. Now, I know that's
Hmm.
not speaking to his personality, but it does speak to his life choices and how he spent his time. So he was very consistent no matter where he was or who he was with. And as his daughter, whether I was with him sitting at the kitchen table in my home or whether I was with him at the Chick-fil-A headquarters in Atlanta or if I was traveling with him on a trip, my dad was always the same. And that consistency in how he lived his life was had a powerful influence on my life. And so I'm grateful that he modeled that well for me.
Well, he's very purposeful because
Yes.
that's why his restaurants, and then we'll get off the restaurants, but he's very purposeful. And I've always been so impressed with the fact of how he handles his employees, how he pours into his employees. And that's what makes Chick-fil-A different and the expectations of service. I mean, it's
Mm,
different. It is a standard that others, go upon. And
mhm.
I do know also, like I teach the DISC personality styles.
Yeah.
Well, he uses that in his restaurants.
Yeah.
Why? Because people learn how to work better together and they learn to like go upon your strength. Find
Hmm.
your
Hmm.
place and your strengths. Nobody's going to pay attention to your weaknesses because nobody wants to work in their weaknesses, right?
That's exactly right. And we do feel like we are better together. We
Yes.
love to train our team members to understand that to lead is to serve, and to learn how to serve well is so important. And my dad is, our company is very purpose driven and purpose centric. Some years ago, really back in the 1980s, the economy was in recession, and it was a difficult time for us to stay in the restaurant business. And some of our leadership pulled away. And my dad asked a critical question. He said, why are we really in business? And it's an important question for all of us even to ask about ourselves. Why are we really here? What's our purpose? And out of that conversation came our corporate purpose for Chick-fil-A, which I'll let you in on a little secret today. We're really not in the chicken business. We're in the people business. That's why you see a lot of things that you're kind of distinguish us from other quick service
Yes.
restaurants, is because we really want to pour into our people. But our corporate purpose is to glorify God by being a faithful steward of all that's been entrusted to us, and to have a positive influence on all who come in contact with Chick-fil-A. And when people hear that purpose statement, they think, well, there's nothing in there about sales. There's nothing in there about growing faster than other businesses. It's quite unique. But when we know what our purpose is, then we understand our priorities. And I feel like maybe Connie and others that come and eat with us, that's what they experience. It's a little different environment because we're so focused on this purpose to glorify God and to steward well what He's given us and have a positive influence on others. And that makes all the difference in the world for sure.
And anywhere we are, when we're traveling, if I remember when there weren't Chick-fil-A's, and I was born in North Carolina, and I remember when there was no Chick-fil-A's in North Carolina, and I remember when they started to be built, we're like, oh, we're getting Chick-fil-A's everywhere. And when you walk into a Chick-fil-A anywhere in the States, you feel at home and you are around the same kind of people because certain proactive, loving, kind people are who are hired. They have high standards. And the truth is that right is right and wrong is wrong. And we're in a mixed up society today where it's all confusing, but we like to live in our bubble.
Yeah, well, no, that's true. And to help train these team members that are in our stores to understand how it actually is, it brings you great joy to serve other people. They have to learn that. It takes a little while to move it from their head to their heart. But when our customers say thank you and we respond with my pleasure, that is our way of trying to help them understand. Even Jesus said it's better to give than to receive. And so when you're giving of yourself to others, whether you're serving them food or opening a door, or picking up trash, when you're able to do that, it is really what life is about anyway, is to be able to serve others. So we do feel like these young people that are in our restaurants, they're probably not going to be um, grow up and have their own career in a restaurant, but they will grow up and they will get careers in other areas of life. And we feel like if we can give them a good solid foundation and build into them life principles that will help develop and grow them, that's where. And on the side, we sell a chicken sandwich, so we love investing in other people for sure.
Well, we could be like, this is the Extraordinary Marriage podcast, and we could
Uh,
be thinking, well, what does all this have to do with an extraordinary marriage? Well, treating each other well, being polite, being kind, being a people person, paying attention to each other. There's so many things. All this still goes into marriages. And so many times people have troubles these days. So, Trudy, tell us, because, we all have our challenges at one time or another in our marriage. What are some challenges that you and your awesome spouse had when you got married?
Yeah, well, John and I've been married now for 46 years. And I go back to those early years. He was actually in law school. He was trying to finish up school. Then we had a baby early on. And there's just always challenges in marriage. I think we all would agree there are no perfect people.
No.
So if there aren't perfect people, there are no perfect marriages. And so I think probably our biggest challenge was just learning how to communicate well with one another, and how important that was. I remember our very first, probably our first fight that we had. I say fight, a heavy disagreement. I don't know how to interpret that, but
I don't like those too good. Yeah.
yeah. So whenever John had done something, I don't know, maybe I had done something, but it flared up this. I told John, I said, well, if you don't like it like this, then just go home to your mom, kind of thing. And we got into that kind of chatter to one another, and we actually scared ourselves because we were very committed in our marriage. But we started talking about, well, look, if you don't like this, just leave. I'll leave, you leave, or whatever. And we sat down with each other and we said, we cannot talk like this. We never want leaving each other to be an option in our marriage. We want to commit that we're going to work through whatever we have to work through. And that was a huge deal to us early on in our marriage, is to make that commitment so solid. And we realized that when we raised our children, we wanted to help them understand, look, mom and dad may disagree on some things, but we want you to know mom and dad love each other, and we're willing to work through whatever challenges that come up in our marriage. I think that brought a lot of security to our children. Again, wasn't a perfect marriage. We certainly had our challenges. We had our challenges as parents raising children, but our children knew mom and dad were going to stick it out through thick and thin, and that mother and dad loved each other. And I think that's so important for children to feel safe in a home and a family where if they happen to be blessed to have a mom and dad who are under one roof raising them.
So, Trudy, what do you think would be some problems in communication, even with couples today or all around? What do you find are communication problems?
Yeah. Well, a big piece for me, I just have to uh, be real authentic here. For me is selfish. I oftentimes want things my way,
Yeah,
when I
me
want
too.
it, how I want it. And so when that's your stance, when you're communicating, relating to others, that's a hard thing to manage. So you have to be willing to submit yourself in a way that says, I want to hear your side of this as well. So that's the communication piece that is so important, that we learn to listen to each other,
Hmm.
more than maybe even talking, and try to reach a sense of understanding. I'll tell you something I learned from my mother when my mother was in her 80s. I picked her up one day and she got in the car, and she said she seemed a little frustrated because I heard her go, I just kind of huffing a little bit, and I said, "Are you okay, Mom?" And she said, "Well, I've learned something real important today." And I said, "Do you want to tell me about that?" And she said, "Well, I've learned today that I'm not going to have any more expectations on your dad." And I said, "Well, what's that about, Mom?" And she said, "Well, kind of for quite a few years, I always thought that maybe your dad would retire one day, and it would be
Mm.
just the two of us doing things." And my dad never retired. So here she is, her mid 80s, saying, and he's still going to work every day. And she just had things that she kind of expected of him, and they just weren't coming to fruition. And she said, "But today, I decided I would have no more expectations." And we chuckled about that. And she asked me, did I have any expectations for John? And I said, yeah, I do actually. There's certain things I'm kind of expecting from him as my husband, as the father to our children. And so it was an interesting discussion. And after my mother passed away, I found a piece of paper in her home where she had written down, do not expect anything, do not expect anything regardless. And I thought, wow, she was such a wise lady. And she discovered this in her late 80s. And I thought, I need to learn this sooner. When communication begins to break down, oftentimes it's because we've set we've set these expectations so high for
Hmm.
this person, especially if it's our spouse, and we expect them to live up to that. And we have to give those to the Lord. I feel like, and that helps us to be able to a level where we can communicate and relate a little better to one another, to listen and not have those expectations.
I remember as a child, my mom taught me not to expect things from people.
Uh-huh.
And, that really held true through all the years because when you don't expect so much, you're not disappointed.
You're not disappointed. And then you're
And so,
surprised
yeah, then
when
you're
things do happen,
surprised and
right?
thankful, and you think it's great
Yeah,
whenever they do something. So, to be
that's right.
less expectant, but you know what? I'm always very expectant of myself.
Mm-hmm.
So some people are expectant of others, and then some of us are expectant of ourselves. Boy, that's a hard place
Mm-hmm.
sometimes to expect so much of ourselves. But I bet your dad and your mom were like that. And I bet you and all your brothers are like that because it's how you were trained and raised up to expect a lot and to step it up, right?
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. And of course, my Christian faith drives so much of what I do and how I think. And I have to go back to God's word and his truth, that tells us that we are his children. the Bible says that in quietness and in trust you'll be our strength. And so we think that a lot of times our strength either comes from something we can muster up ourselves, or we allow ourselves to be quiet, to be still, and put our trust and our faith in a God who created us, who knows how we're wired, and that can help us through these times of challenge in our own life, whether we're wrestling with expectations of ourselves or expectations of others.
Well, I think one of the really important things these days is the values and all the things, and a lot of our things are biblical. Everything
Mm.
good is actually biblical, right?
Yeah,
Um,
right.
but the things that we learn from our parents that we pass on to our kids, I think in society today, unfortunately, values have been lowered and expectations have been lowered.
Mm.
And I have found that people cannot be or do anything that they have not never seen before. They've never
Mm.
experienced. And so we get frustrated with people who are different but a lot of times they're just exhibiting all that they know. They don't know any difference. So how about some things that maybe some values, some special things that your parents pass to you, because part of marriage is raising our kids and raising good kids, stable
Hmm.
kids, smart kids. What are some things that your parents passed to you that you certainly passed on to your kids?
Well, things that I saw in my mom and dad's life, one is just living their life, being consistent in how they live their life. That seemed to be
Example.
very important to them. So and it's kind of interesting how it plays right on out into their professional life. When you talk about going to Chick-fil-A, we hope that whether you eat a Chick-fil-A in North Carolina or in Tennessee or in Georgia or in California,
Hmm.
that you get the same great quality experience regardless of where you are. So that sense of consistency is important. So when I saw my parents being consistent in how they lived out their life, whether in the house or outside the home, that was a powerful impact for me. Something else that I saw in my parents was their faithfulness to each other. And again, my parents were married for 66 years, but let me tell you, they had their ups and downs. And being the only daughter and being a little older, I think my mother, would share things. She would have moments that she was just very frustrated with my dad. He was a great man, but there were challenges, but they
It
were faithful
happens.
to one another. It happens. That's exactly right. But they were faithful to one another. They were faithful to God in their own personal lives and certainly in their professional life. That was a desire for them that they would build a business on biblical principles. And then they were faithful to people around them. They were just faithful in friendships. And then I think if I had to pin one more thing to my mom and dad, I would say they were extremely generous. It was a characteristic of
Hmm.
value that they demonstrated over and over to us when we were growing up as being generous. Now, a lot of times we think of being generous as having money and sharing it with others. And of course, that would be a way to be generous. But I think more of being generous with your time, how you spend it, and how you invest it with other people. I think about talents that we have, our skills and ability. I saw my mom and dad use those well. Resources that we have beyond financial resources might be experiences or networking with people. My dad loved to connect this person with that person, and my mother loved to introduce young girls to older women that help them in their journey of life. And so that was a great way to see them be generous, to be able to make those connections for people, and then actually generous with their influence. My mom and dad knew that the more you hang around people, the more opportunity you have to influence and impact their lives. So we saw that being instilled, that was just regular practice for them. And because we saw it lived out, I think my brothers and I, we caught it very, very easily. And now it's the very same thing that we're trying to pass on to our own children and to our grandchildren. Some of these same values that are so important.
My favorite on that, Trudy, was that they were the same in public as they were at home. And many times some of the biggest problems in marriage is that people have learned that you are this way in public, got to look good, and
Yeah.
then you act and your values and you're like totally different at home. And if
Yeah.
somebody learns that, then it's like they just think that's how it's supposed to be done. So I love that
Mm-hmm.
that they were the same, and also that they
Yeah.
were generous. I
Yeah.
mean, I've seen that. In fact, I got to see your dad. I got to see Truett over at the Luau here in
Uh-huh.
Fayetteville, Georgia.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
It might have been his birthday or a special event. I can't remember, but it was with the chamber, the Fayette Chamber, and I get to actually see him and maybe get a picture and that kind of thing. But
Yeah.
yeah, special people. So what else do you think you passed along to your kids? Because that's all we have in our treasure box is what we
Right.
learned ourselves, right?
Most definitely. So John and I have five values, and we have passed these to our children, and yet they have crafted their own values because now they're married, and but they're similar, and they all kind of go hand in hand. We all have values. I think we should put that out there for everybody to know. You may not ever really identified them or even verbalize them, but we all have values. Values are simply things that matter, what matters most to us.
Hmm.
So, any given day, you invest your time into whatever matters to you the most for that particular day. But for John and I, our Christian faith is one of our values that we lean heavily into. It is the filter for all of our decision making process. Family is a value to us. We dedicate time on our calendar to spend with our family now that all of our children are grown and we've got grandchildren. We make sure we're intentional with how we're investing our time with our family members. The third value for us is integrity, that we try to make the right choices at the right time, regardless of where we are or who we're with. That we just feel like that's an important guide and example for our children. Then our last two, fourth and fifth values are generosity, another one that I've kind of carried over from my mom and dad, and gratitude, just being grateful
Hmm.
for what we had. I'll tell you this quick little story. My mom and dad told us as children that if we would wait till we were 18, they would help us get our first car. So when you're 12, 11, 12, and your parents say that, well, that sounds wonderful. But then we got to be 15 and 16. We saw a lot of our friends getting cars and stuff. And so my dad would say, but remember, we told you if you wait till you're 18, we'll help you get your very first car. So we were content in doing that. But I remember when I got my car, when I turned 18, that my dad bought the car. He gave me the keys and he said, Trudy, I know you think that this car is coming from your earthly parents, but we want to help you understand that this car is actually from the Lord. He's providing this for you, and you need to use this for God's honor wherever you go in this car, whatever the conduct is in this car, whatever the conversation is in this
Oh,
car, whatever
heavy.
the music is in this car, needs to be honoring to the Lord. Heavy is right. I mean, and but it was just a very tangible way that my parents helped me understand that we need to be grateful for what we have, and need to recognize that we are merely stewards of everything that we have. Anything that we hold in our hands has come, from the Lord. We wouldn't have it if it weren't for the Lord. And so it really helped me to understand this idea of how important gratitude needs to be in our life, that we're grateful for everything that we have. First of all, that it's come from the Lord, and second of all, that we can steward it well. So we hope that those kind of values have passed. We've seen them pass to our children and now to our grandchildren. But each of our own children who are now married, they've kind of sorted through what are their values, what is going to be their focus for life, and that brings us a lot of encouragement to see that happen.
Wow. Well, I have to say, your dad, we talk about his communication style. He must have been a deep thinking man because that was so smart to put that out there. And now it's past just your dad, and
Yep.
it is like you're doing unto the Lord. And so, boy, oh boy, it'd be like wearing that little. Remember the bracelet said, "What would Jesus do?" Everybody
Yes,
on earth.
yes.
It's got you got it there with you all the
WWJD,
time,
right?
and
Yeah.
you're reminded that God sees everything that you're doing. Well, Tree, my favorite thing on that you just said was gratefulness. And I think that if every marriage, every married couple, and if we taught our kids this too, to be grateful and thankful for everything that we have, so many times we take things absolutely for granted. We take our spouse for granted. We take our
Mm-hmm.
house, our work, our all these different things for granted. And, they can be gone in the blink of an eye. And I think that when we are grateful for things and thankful for things like you were for your car, you know,
Mm-hmm.
um, I, it presents a better attitude, a better thought process. Um, it, anyway, being thankful and grateful. You just
Yeah.
can't be stinking thinking when you're being grateful and thankful, right? You
That's
can't have
exactly
stinking
right.
thinking.
And it has to come from the heart. And, we just have to verbalize our gratitude. I'm kind of the same way. I'll go through the whole day maybe and forget to say thank you to somebody. But a habit um, that I've picked up in more recent years is writing notes to people.
Mm,
I we don't write very much anymore. We text. We might call. We certainly maybe send an email. But I've picked back up just writing and writing notes to friends to thank them for different things. It's a habit, and I think it's something they tend to really appreciate. We get Christmas cards in the month of December, like everybody else does, and we save all those, and we got them in a basket. And John and I have taken the evening time. We'll take 4 or 5 of those Christmas cards, and we'll pray for those people. And then I'll
mm.
drop them a text and say, I snap a picture of their card and say, we just came across your card today. And it may be January, February, March, during the year. And I said, we came across your card tonight. And John and I paused to pray for you and for your family. Thank you for sending the card. And thank you for your friendship or whatever the relationship is that we have with them. So we have to get ourselves in a habit of expressing thanks, in particular to our spouses. I'm probably the worst about saying thank you to John for things that he does. But I know how important it is. I've not done this before, but I have heard of people putting like 10 pennies in their pocket, and throughout the day, every time they say thank you to somebody about something, they move that penny to the other pocket so that they make sure that they've expressed at least 10 times during the day expressions of gratitude to people. Anything that triggers a reminder to you to be grateful and to thank people. I've heard of giving thanks kind of jars. Someone gave us one year, and we used it. You write on a piece of paper and you put it in the jar of what you're thankful for, and then you go through that through the year. So there's a lot of things that you can do. I think sometimes we just need a reminder, some kind of little tool that helps us to remind ourselves that we need to be grateful people for sure.
Well, sometimes we get so frustrated by all the little things in marriage, and people forget about all the good things in their marriage because what
That's
is it?
right.
Even in the Bible, it says it takes three positives to undo one negative. And so if you've got a lot of negatives under your belt, boy, buddy, you've got a lot of positives that you need to be putting out there to cancel out those negative things. One of the things I had heard before was a gratitude notebook. So for anybody
Okay.
listening who is feeling like my frustration, my husband is frustrating me, so it's like I can't see anything good in my marriage. To start a gratitude book and to write
Mhm.
down things that are like three things every day you're thankful for, and sometimes just changing our attitude, changing our heart, changing our thoughts can make a difference. We get stuck. Well,
It
Trudy, I
can,
want to
yeah.
finish up today with your telling. Let's see, telling us a little about your travel. It happened whenever we
Okay.
were working on booking this podcast that you were out there traveling. Tell us some of the places that you've been.
Well, I get to travel all over the US. I enjoy opportunity to speak in front of people. It's a way to leverage my opportunity of influence. Most of the time, they're related to some of the books that I've written. My latest book is on legacy, a legacy that lasts. Prior to that, I wrote a book about my mom. The title of that book is called A Quiet Strength because everybody
Oh,
knows about my dad. You can Google his name and read an awful lot about him. He had a lot of books out, but very few people knew anything about my mother. I tell people for everything that's seen, it is the result of the unseen. So if anybody
mm,
sees our family or they see our business, we like for them to understand that our mom was a rock for our family. And I thought people need to know her story. So anyway, a couple of years ago, I wrote a book about her life called A Quiet Street. So I get an opportunity to speak about that from time to time, places. Just more recently, John and I were in Southeast Asia. I've not been to that part of the world before.
wow.
Amazing. But the most exciting thing is to see God at work in the lives of people, even on the other side of the world. God is a big God. And I'm always amazed. John and I were missionaries in Brazil for quite a few years. We took two small children with us. We had two more born overseas. And we are all fluent in Portuguese. We had to learn to speak Portuguese, of course, there in that country. And I remember trying to learn the language and how hard it was. And I realized, man, the Lord knows all these languages all around the world. He can communicate with anybody in any language. And I'm pretty impressed with that, especially having tried to learn a second language. But traveling has been wonderful. It's allowed me to connect with a lot of different people. And here's the deal. I thought we're all challenged in so many of the same ways. No matter where you go, everybody's looking for peace. They're wanting a sense of hope.
Yes.
They're needing joy, and so it's wonderful to be able to be in places and to share with people and take them back to the truth of God's word, that they know that they can have a sense of peace and hope and joy that comes in knowing Jesus Christ. So I get that opportunity to share that message as well.
Well, Trudy, you have been such a joy and so much fun because we've never gotten to talk before this.
No,
And it happens that you go to my daughter's church and or so I'm thankful for this opportunity to speak with you. I think I heard your choir special the other night.
yes, we did
Oh
an Easter
yeah.
musical. Yes, we did.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Were you there for the service?
I was actually. It was on a Sunday
Oh,
evening
perfect.
and we didn't have
Yes.
church, so I was able to be there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was great. Well, thank you so very much for taking your time out to speak with me today and sharing, the values of your family. And I mean, it's an amazing thing when a beautiful, well thought out business, and we're always curious about those things. But
Sure.
ultimately, when it comes down to our marriage, talking to another friend who's been married a long time, I got 44 years in. Hey, we're
There you
looking
go.
good, aren't we? No,
Yeah, we're doing great. We're doing great. Yeah. Well, I think one of the best gifts we can give to our children are loving mom and dad.
absolutely.
It's just something that they so deserving of. And when they see the love that happens between a marriage, they understand God's love even better. Paul says it in the book of Ephesians when we're just wrapping up this thought about life. He says, "So be careful how you live. Don't live as those who are unwise, but live as those who are wise. Make the most of every opportunity, even in these evil days." So we all have the opportunity. We get to choose how we're going to live life. And I pray that we would always choose to live in such a way that our legacy lasts and it is passed from generation to generation.
Absolutely gorgeous. Thank you, Trudy.
My pleasure. Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.